Well, we are starting a new series called Get Smart. It's a study through the book of Proverbs. We're going to look at little nuggets of wisdom. Proverbs are almost like mini sermons in each verse. And this morning I wanted to start off with work ethic. Now, I asked this question a few weeks ago. You might have seen it on my social media. Here's the question I posed. Do people today have a greater, same, or lesser work ethic than 30 years ago? So I asked that question, and I don't know, what do you all think? Perhaps some people say greater, same, lesser. Man, I felt like an emperor in Rome just now. All right. It's all over the place. There were several comments on there, and I do think it's hard to measure at times. Partly it depends on how you define work ethic, right? But I've been doing my research, and I've read a few books and listened to even a few TED Talks, and I do think there were some insightful things. As a matter of fact, I think the comments under my Facebook post captured a lot of the essence of what I did in my research, and it's interesting. It's like they had done their research as well. So you could read through those and see those. Elise Sullivan posted a good post last night, even from a book about it. So I encourage you to read some of those posts. And it's interesting because I was also looking at research in our area within a 5-mile radius of our church. And just fun fact, 70% of the people within a 5-mile radius of the church have white-collar jobs and 30% have blue-collar jobs. So there's a high percent of professional career folks here, as well as other types of professions here. But it begs the question, how is our work ethic doing? And one of my favorite pieces of information on this topic was a leadership podcast from Craig Groeschel. Maybe listened to it about 2 months ago or so. I was listening to it. And he shared 4 things that every workplace needs or should have, and then 3 new values that have occurred in the past few years, really since COVID. So I want to briefly share those because I thought this was interesting. And here it is, what workplaces want. So these are things that if you're going to work for a company or someplace, you want these things to be true. It's like you want a mission to accomplish, you want a culture to embrace, you want a place where you can grow, and you want a people to enjoy. And I'm assuming that if you have a job, whether it's a blue-collar or white-collar job, that you hope these things are true for you as well. I hope it's true for our church. I hope that there's a sense that people who attend this church, they feel like, yeah, there's a mission I want to accomplish. I want to help reach lost people and equip saints. I hope that you recognize there's a culture to embrace. I hope you're like, man, I love the church because it's a loving environment. Even this morning, someone said, I love this church because of the people. And I hope that you could be proud to be a part of the CMA Church of Morgantown. I hope that you've discovered this is a place to grow. Opportunities like Chrissy Feathers was talking about. There's places to grow and serve in our church, that there's opportunities here. And I hope that there are people that you can enjoy. Don't do this alone. The Christian life is not designed to be lived alone, but there are people to enjoy. And if you're here and you're the boss of a company or something, look at these and evaluate, man, do I provide this for the people that work for me? Whether you're in a medical profession or a business or whatever. But the thing that I found really interesting was the 3 new trends that he talked about that have occurred in the last few years, really since COVID. These are 3 new values that employees really want now. So here's the first one, flexibility. There's a greater sense that now I'd like to have a little more flexibility. That value has increased. More people have been able to work from home than they used to, and so a lot of companies have adapted and changed their methods in order to accommodate greater flexibility to keep their employees happy. And I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. I'm just saying that it's a new reality for a lot of people that are hiring. People expect greater flexibility. Another thing is that many people want to feel settled. They have been unsettled by unpredictable economics and work situations. And I can tell you from personal experience as a pastor or talking to medical professionals or law enforcement or educators that there have been a lot of unsettling and more chaos in our lives the past 2 years. And a lot of that unsettledness is still there. And so we recognize people often need to feel settled. There needs to be a sense of security. And I hope that the church, again, can be a place where you can feel more settled in this community that helps you love God and love others. The last one, this was intriguing. Many people don't want to work as hard as they did before. What does that mean? Well, if you've read book, I think this is consistent with the books and the research I've been looking at. The old mindset was that just hit the grind, go after it, just work harder. That's not the mindset anymore, and this isn't necessarily bad. It used to be just grind it out. That mindset isn't there. Matter of fact, there's new things that's emerging, like quiet quitting. If you don't know what that is, it's just like just stop showing up for work. I don't want to do that job anymore. Just don't show up anymore. In people that don't want to work as hard, it's not necessarily a bad thing when it's like, hey, there's a cultural shift to working smarter, not as hard. Why are we breaking our backs if we can be smarter? And so technology has afforded us new opportunities and so forth like that. There's a greater value on making sure a team is healthier versus the old mindset of just go after it. We're just going to work here and stay until it's done. But I think that's interesting because I think there could be some unintended consequences of not being a hard worker, or at least embracing that mindset. So here's what I want to do. We're going to talk about work ethic for a little bit. First, let me give you a definition. Work ethic has been defined as the principle that hard work is intrinsically virtuous and worthy of reward. And I think this starts with a biblical perspective. Let's talk about this for a minute. The Greek word for work is ergon. It's this definition. It's the business or enterprise that someone's doing. The thing that we produce or accomplish by our hand, our art, our industry, or our mind. It's our deeds. It's literally the industry of our life. It's what we produce. That is our work. That is our ergon. And it's interesting because, again, this is the Greek word for work. And in the New Testament, this word appears 176 times. And although Hebrew is the language of the Old Testament, if you look at a Greek version of the Old Testament, you can find the word ergon 421 times. All that to say is the concept and the idea of work, or ergon, is all through the Bible. It starts out in Genesis. If you look at Genesis, you see that God does work. Look at Genesis 2:2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. Now, fast forward to the last chapter of the last book of the Bible. Revelation 22, it says this, "And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give to everyone according to his ergon," his work. So work starts with God, and it's expected of us. Some translations use the word deeds. It's what we produce. Here's the bottom line. We will stand before God someday, and we will give an account for the ergon, the work that we produce. Now, we are not saved by works, but we are saved for works. And make no mistake about it, we will stand before God accountable to the work, the ergon of our lives, what we produce in this life. My concern is that our work ethic may be slipping. And so I wanted to speak on this topic and look at the book of Proverbs, because here's the truth. A lazy person is a poor Christian. Pun intended. Meaning that there's a correlation with laziness, and faith and laziness doesn't mix very well. And if work ethic slips and laziness takes root in your life, it impacts other areas of your life as well. It impacts your education. It'll impact your opportunities, your performances, your relationships, and yes, it will also impact your spiritual walk with God. So here's what I want to do. I want to look at some parables related to work. And again, a parable is just kind of a proverb is sort of not a parable, a proverb is just a wise saying. A proverb comes from the Hebrew word to rule or to govern. So the concept behind the book of Proverbs is that here's some wise sayings that should rule and govern our lives. So let's look at a few. The first one is Proverbs 10. It's the lesson of neglect. Proverbs 10:4 says this, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son." In other words, this is saying that neglect, there's something to learn from neglect. That laziness and diligence have two different directions in your life. If you follow the path of laziness, it's going to bring you to places where you don't want to go. If you follow the path of diligence, it'll bring you to wealth. You can either go to poverty or towards wealth. And this mindset of whether you're lazy or diligent in life will help direct the trajectory of that. And this is true not just, especially true for times, in biblical times, but this is true in multiple areas of life. Meaning not only finances, but relationships. You can experience relationship poverty because you're lazy as it relates to investing in your marriage or with your kids or with your coworkers. You can experience relationship poverty by not investing. And you can look at other people and you recognize that they are diligent in their relationships, and you can see the value of that investment. Have you ever met someone who's intellectually bankrupt? They don't think before they act kind of things. They're lazy, and as it relates to processing information, they don't study to learn. If you're in college, maybe you're studying to make the grade versus learning. Or perhaps what I call the counterfeit intelligence, meaning that you don't learn yourself, you regurgitate what somebody else learned and present that as your knowledge. So people think that you're smart, and when you're actually not, you're just counterfeit. You're just regurgitating somebody else's. The Bible is pretty clear that neglect, as it relates to finances, as it relates to relationships, as it relates to intelligence, it'll set us on a path, a trajectory. Diligence makes the difference. So a couple questions I would ask you to consider. One is, which word would best describe you? Apathy or motivated, as it relates to work, as it relates to areas of your life? What are you pursuing and what are you neglecting? These are questions for you to answer personally. Another lesson, a lesson of priorities. Proverbs 12 says this: those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. Another translation says, whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. Now, this is a parable that reminds us of priorities. Now, this was especially important during this time because, again, this analogy takes place in a different time. It's not like they can order McDonald's or Grubhub to come show up and bring them a Mick whatever. This is a time where they had to do work. If you didn't get out there and work in the field, then you didn't have food for your family. You couldn't eat. So this was a work that they needed to go out and work the land, because if they didn't make that a priority, then they will suffer, their family will suffer, the community will suffer. We see this even in Thessalonians. In Thessalonica, Paul preached the gospel. People were trusting Christ, and they were so convinced that he was going to return, because Paul was telling them, if you read 1 Thessalonians 4, and the Lord's going to return, and they were expecting the Lord's return. So you got people that are converted, Christ followers, they're expecting the Lord's return. So what do? They stop working. We're waiting on heaven, and so they quit working, and Paul had to write another letter, 2 Thessalonians, because they were neglecting being responsible to their families, to their community. And he's like, you know what? If you don't work, don't eat. He's that message in 2 Thessalonians 3. He's like, listen, you need to, because if you're not working and you under the being spiritual, just waiting on the Lord, so why invest in worldly things and let's just wait on the Lord to return? You're not providing for your family. You're not being a good witness in the community. So Paul tells them they need to get their priorities straight. So here's a question: do we neglect important work for unimportant time wasters? If you've read any leadership books or you've been a part of priorities class, you've probably seen the Eisenhower matrix. It looks something like this. Again, I've seen various versions of this, but it asks you to kind of figure out your schedule. It says, what's your important, urgent things? And whatever's important, urgent, like I'm preaching this week, I need to make sure I prepare for that. This is something I just need to do it. My wife's not feeling well, I need to help her. These are things that I recognize in my schedule that I have to do. You need to feed your family. That's a priority. There are other things that are important but not urgent. Let me remind you of one of those, that taxes are coming soon if you haven't done your taxes yet, right? But you're like, some of you that will become important and urgent here in a few weeks. But for right now, it might feel like, yeah, that's important, but it's not urgent yet. The things that are in this category are often things that we need to plan. These are also the things that is easiest to procrastinate and neglect sometimes, whether it's scheduling meetings or doing things like that. There's also the urgent but not important. And this, again, look at this through the lens of work, because you could look at this through a lot of other lens. Meaning that these are things that need done, but somebody else could potentially do them. You can delegate them, those kind of things. Quick story. So Ramsey Persing, he's one of our young elders here, and he actually kicked my butt in the parking lot a few weeks ago with truth. Not an actual fight. I think I could take him in an actual fight, but well, he'll be wanting to spar this week. Wait and see. He's competitive. No, he'd probably whip me there too. But he was telling me, we had the elders meeting, and I had planned on delegating for when my wife was having surgery, because I knew it was going to be lengthy and I knew it was going to be out for a while. And this happens sometimes in the medical community, because I had Will Colson and Brent preaching, and it was all going to be, and then she would recover and I would jump back in, and it was scheduled for February 1st, and they changed the schedule on me. They moved it from February 1st to February 8th, and I'm like, oh, you know what that's like? You're like, that's really inconvenient for me, because we had this plan of how this was going to work and how recovery was going to work. And so I talked to Brent and them, and long story short, I'm like telling Ramsey, I'm like, I guess I'm going to have to preach, this last week. And he's like, why? Be with your wife. And I'm like, but I haven't preached in 2 weeks already. That'll be 3 weeks in a row that I haven't preached. He's like, so? He was reminding me of the priorities. Shouldn't your wife be, he was kicking my butt out in the parking lot with these things. And I'll be honest, I was wrestling with it. But by the time Saturday rolled around and my wife was still in the hospital and she wasn't here Sunday, honestly, it was a settled issue. It was difficult in the parking lot identifying my priorities, but by the time I settled the issue, when Saturday rolled around, I'm like, no, Craig can do the baby dedication. Brent can close things out. I'm like, I was delegating, and honestly, those guys did a better job than I could have done anyway, and I was thankful, but it was clarifying what my priorities should be. And I believe that when my wife was in the hospital during the service, that my priority was to be with my wife and skip church. And so that's what I did, watching the service on my phone in her room. My point is we need to recognize what are the priority things, what are the important, urgent things, what are the not important, not urgent things. And what are the not important, not urgent things that distracts us? Like social media, could be junk food and those kind of things. Now, here's a convicting question. What do you spend most of your time doing? Things that are not important, not urgent, or important, urgent things? Do you even have things categorized in your head to know where you spend most of your time? Because if you want to evaluate your work ethic, answer the question, do I spend more time and effort doing important, urgent things, or doing things that are not important and not urgent? Chances are, if you're spending all of your time in the bottom right-hand quadrant, that's where you need to eliminate, and you need to identify what needs to go in that. And I would even ask you, where does cultivating your relationship with God go? Because oftentimes it falls into the next category we're going to be talking about. It falls into it's important, but it doesn't feel urgent right now. But I plan on getting involved in a community group. I plan on serving more in the church. I plan on being there Sunday, but then the thing that I procrastinated on is not done, so I don't go to church on Sunday to do that thing. And it keeps going. So this third and last lesson is the lesson of good intentions without action. Proverbs 13 says this, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. Proverbs 20 says it this way, sluggards do not plow in season. So at harvest time, they look and find nothing. Now, keep in mind, this was written different time period, different circumstances. Israel had this moderate climate. So there was work that needed to be done while it was still winter in order to be prepared for the harvest that you're going to get in the summer. And it would be easy to say, well, it's too cold outside, and sit by the fire and say, when it warms up, then I'll do the work that I need to do, because you're not going to get it for months down the road anyway. So it's easy to procrastinate. It's easy to have good intentions. The problem is, if you miss the work that needs to be done in the winter, you won't get the harvest that needs to be produced in the summer. You have good intentions. I want to see this happen. I want to see spiritual growth. I want to do this in parenting. I want to do this in various areas of life, but a lot of times the investment is on this side of the result, whether it's exercise, personal health, and spiritual health, and relationship. And that was true here. It's kind of like that old story, the analogy of the man with the leaky roof. He's like, man, I got a leaky roof. I need to fix the roof. But it's raining right now, so I can't fix the roof while it's raining. And then when it's not raining, I don't feel like I need to fix the roof. So it just doesn't get done. Do you have leaky roof issues in your life that aren't getting the priority or the attention they need, or like you're aware of it? Matter of fact, some of you probably thought of a scenario, a leaky roof scenario popped in your head. It might have been an actual leaky roof, but probably popped in your head when I said it, and you have no real plan of action towards it. It's just that needs done, and I know it needs done, but you have not planned for it. You need to have like a list of things, or recognizing things that we need path steps towards. Some of you need to take baby steps. I think one of the things that people do that overwhelm them is they don't go for first downs, they go for touchdowns. Meaning, like if you watched the Super Bowl last week, you know that it's first downs that win the game. You don't Hail Mary every play. And some of you, whatever issue or goal you're trying to reach, you need some first down steps towards it instead of just trying to go all out for it. Take some steps that will help you progress in that area versus trying to go all in. So here's my closing thoughts, and maybe some of the points some of you theologians have been waiting for. The key to a good work ethic, I believe Paul said it in Colossians 3, verse 23. It says this: whatever you do, and that whatever, that word means whatever. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. This is an interesting mindset. Paul is telling people to work in such a way. He's actually talking to a slave-master relationship. There's a sense that he's saying that you need to stop treating your employer or the person you're working for as if you're working for them. Think about it as if you were working for the Lord. Would that affect how you work? Would that affect your performance, your mentality? He's like, work as to the Lord. That is a perspective that recognizes that my work, my ergon, the industry of my life, I'm going to stand before God and give an account. And that's not just profession, that's across the board. So am I working? Am I living life? Am I producing work as to the Lord? So when I'm preparing the sermon, my mindset isn't that how do I speak to the people or how do I make everybody happy with what I'm going to say, but rather, how do I take what God has entrusted to me and prepare it in a way that honors Him and present what God has given me? Because I have to give an account to God for what I say behind the pulpit. Do you work, whatever it is, as to the Lord and not just to your employer? Because guess what? Your employer can be a jerk sometimes. Don't amen especially if they're here. But when your mindset is as to the Lord, it doesn't matter if you work for a jerk of an employer or not. You're not working as to that person. You're working as to the Lord. Paul also said in 1 Corinthians 15:10, this ironic statement that he said, I worked harder than any, he's talking about apostles. And he's like, I've worked harder than any of them. What does he mean? The context of that is that he worked harder than the other apostles because of his background where he persecuted the Christians first And now he's got a ministry calling that's not to the Jews, but to the Gentiles. And so for him to have a ministry platform, he's got to work hard. He's got to go above and beyond. But he says, I worked harder than any of them. But then he says, but not me, but God's grace in me. The way we're able to have good work ethic is to recognize that we are accountable before God for our work, and that we don't honor God by our work per se, but it's God's grace in us that enables us to do what God's called us to do. So here's my closing thoughts. I pray you don't neglect responsibilities. And I pray that you have good work priorities. And I pray that you have more than just intentions, but actual steps towards whatever goals you have. But most of all, I pray that you have a perspective that you're working as to the Lord by God's grace with whatever God has called you to do. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the work that you've called us to, the industry of our lives, whether it's our careers, professions, everything that you've entrusted to us, would we be good stewards of it? And as the world around us seems to have less of a work ethic, would it not be contagious in your church? But rather, would we be diligent? Lord, I pray that we would be men and women of character and integrity that would define us. Men and women of humility and teachable attitudes. That we would have diligence and drive to improve whatever businesses or entities we're working with. I pray that we would have passion and productivity. And I pray especially for the church, if we represent your name, would we be better examples to the world around us? Would there be a difference? It's one of the ways we can witness and be salt and light in our communities is by our work. So I pray that our Aragon, I pray that our work that we produce is God honoring by your grace. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.